Greetings, the cows. Thank you for joining us for another program. I hope we have been sharing constructive information. That is our goal, to share constructive information about racism, what it is, and how it works, so that we can all work as hard and efficient as possible to replace racism with justice immediately. Definitely want to give thanks to Mr. Josh Wickett, victim of racism. He is the person who informed me about our guest for today's program. He was writing, he was writing about her work, specifically a study that she did about how people in power are better liars. Very interesting, and I think you can see how that's applicable to racism. When I went to find out more information about the person who did that study, found out that she had also done a lot of research on racism, and in particular nonverbal communication of racial bias. Very interesting research. I think you all will learn a lot. She said she was an expert and a blonde white girl, so should be very informative program today. I want you to pay particular attention when we get to one of the last studies that she did later in the program. They used 5 films in the study. The 5 films are As Good as It Gets, Pulp Fiction, The Matrix, Green Mile, and Shawshank Redemption. Those are the 5 films. Think about those. We'll get to them when we get to the study. I thought that was very interesting as well. But our guest for today's program, she is an assistant professor at the Colombia Business School. Very informative. Pleasure to have her. She just moved and still found time and phone access to give us a jingle to share with us this evening. Our guest is Professor Dana R. Carney. Are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Outstanding. Again, thank you for sharing some of your time with us this evening. If you could tell the folks who are listening in a little bit about the work that you do at the Colombia Business School, and I guess just any background information you think would be relevant.
Sure. So I'm a social psychologist by training. And so what that means is that, I majored in psychology and then studied psychology in graduate school. And I'm interested in, how people make judgments about other people. And I'm particularly interested in the cues that we use to make these judgments. And so a bulk of my work focuses on, these sort of subtle nonverbal signals that we're always sending out, sometimes on purpose, sometimes they come out automatically, and how we as perceivers kind of, pay attention to those cues and how they help us make meaning out of what's going on in another person's mind, what that person is like. But I'm also interested in how they shape us in ways that are very subtle, So like if you see something on the television where someone's smiling at a particular product, are you more likely to buy that product when you go to the store that day? So I have this fear that our minds are sort of hijacked by the world, and that we in some ways don't have as much free will as we really would like to have, or that we think we have. And so this idea of these rapid judgments that we make that are kind of unconscious led me toward a path of trying to understand the unconscious mind and how that works, and how we are sort of socialized to believe certain things, to think certain things are good or bad, and how that then shapes how we make judgments as people, including gender issues and social group issues. And my job at Colombia Business School, so some of your listeners may know that business schools management divisions are comprised of social psychologists to a great extent, as well as behavioral economists, and then also sociologists. So I'm very much just a social psychologist doing social psychology at a business school. And so, I have graduate students that learn from me, and I teach MBA, so Masters in Business Administration. I teach those students, but I basically teach them social psychology, and I teach them about some of the things we're going to talk about today. Are you still with me?
Can you hear me? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to be clear. If you could repeat the students that you teach in the business school, if you could just repeat the folks that you teach and that information about social psychology, that would be great.
Oh, sure. So essentially, I'm just a social psychologist by training, and I teach social psychology to business students. So, when a master's in business administration student, an MBA student, gets their MBA, they have to take finance classes and all kinds of things like that. But they also have to take what's called a soft skills class, and that class is typically, how do you make sense of other people? What are social skills? How can we be better leaders? How can we be more ethical? Things about procedural justice and fairness, and sort of we have to send them off into the world to be these business leaders, and we want to teach them as much as we can about how to be good people and how to, navigate social worlds ethically, responsibly, and also well. And so that's the class that I teach at Colombia Business School. So I guess all of that is just to simply say that while I'm at Colombia Business School, I'm very much a social psychologist interested in how we make sense of other people and what are the cues that we use to kind of figure out what's going on in another person's mind, and to what extent do we really have control over our own thoughts? Something that, you'll see in my work to a great extent is, wow, like stuff that socializes us and stuff that we might not even realize is happening around us gets into our minds and gets into our brains and shapes how we see people and the behaviors that we engage in and the choices that we make.
Very interesting. We just did a program within a week with the gentleman Stephen Jacobson, who talks a lot about issues of thought suppression. He did a whole program, shared a lot of information about that, and might overlap well with information we cover today. I guess I ask all of my folks that come in, you've pretty much already stated, not only are you a white woman, you are a blonde white woman, correct?
Yeah. Well, not naturally, but don't tell anyone. I'm just kidding.
Right on. Right on. She shared that when I first asked her to come on the program. Like, why would you want a blonde white girl to come talk about racism? And who would be better? And she said she's an expert.
Well, let me just rephrase. Let me just clarify. So I went to your website and I looked, and I was like, wow, this is really intense. Like, are you sure that someone who hasn't personally experienced discrimination, well, I have as a woman, I'm quite sure, but not as a person of color. Like, do you feel comfortable with me coming on and sharing my research? Because some of the criticism that white people get when they study racism is you don't really know what you're talking about. And so that I struggle with that, because these issues are extremely important to me, and I work very hard trying to understand them and make the world a better place. And so while it's true that I'll never understand, and I know this, I still feel like I can make an important contribution. And so that's why I kind of jokingly said to you, like, are you sure your listeners really want to hear about these things from me? While I have something to say, and I really believe that, maybe not everyone agrees.
As someone who, I have a great respect for research and thorough scholarship, I'm very interested in hearing more of what you have to say, having read your work, and I think I try to cultivate a program where people tune in to get accurate information about what racism is and how it works, and I think you are an expert at that. And I would agree with your assessment. I think you have a lot of expertise in that, and I'm eager to hop into it. This program, the C.O.W.S, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, and I use the terms racism and white supremacy interchangeably as synonyms.
Yeah, I noticed that. Can you talk for just a second about? Do you mind if I ask you a question really quickly? I find that to be strong, and I'm interested in your ideas underlying them. Just to kind of get to know your mindset just a little bit. I would love just if you spend 30 seconds, because I read that on your website, and I thought, wow, that's a really strong statement. And so I want to better understand just a little bit Do you mind if I interview you for just 1 second?
1 second, because we have just tremendous information I want to share. But yeah, no problem sharing that. I use them interchangeably because I feel that white supremacy it's a very strong word. It elicits a very strong emotional response from white people and non-white people when I use the term, but I feel it is most accurate to describe the situation on this planet currently as it relates to people that unfortunately white people dominate non-white people worldwide in all areas of activity. And I definitely think the planet as it exists now would qualify as a global system of white supremacy. And I think I try to make sure that I keep white supremacy tied to racism so that we don't get into a discussion of, well, everybody is racist, and I think, black people are racist, I think Asian people are racist. That we just want to be very clear that the power dynamic by far is white domination over non-white people worldwide. So that's why I use the term white supremacy, to try to convey the enormity of this problem.
Got it. Agreed. 100%.
Wow. So, okay, well, I'll ask. My definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think that definition is accurate?
I have to think more about it. I mean, so the piece that I wonder about is that it sounds motivated, right? So the way that you describe it, it sounds like that the dominant folks try to with effort and with harm in mind, subordinate. I think that the dynamic is certainly what you describe. The effort part and the willfulness part is the piece that I don't think everyone would agree with. I think that, what the research shows is that most people, well, I'd say at least half of white people, they want to be egalitarian. They try. And so that's the part that makes me that's the piece that I question. But I can say that, that's a very Nietzschean way of thinking about it, right? It's that the powerful only have power because there are subordinates. So this is clearly a different conversation that's very philosophical, but I mean, it's certainly interesting. If you cut it down to its most basic part, power exists because there are powerless. And so in a sense, what you're saying isn't wrong at all, right? Because people with power, they have more access to resources. Why wouldn't you want to maintain that? Of course you would, right? So the people with the access to resources want to maintain that power. And if the only way they can maintain it is by maintaining a power distance between themselves and others, then it's like this self-perpetuating, disparity, essentially. And because there are certain social groups that appear to be the ones with power, and there are certain social groups that tend not to be the ones with power across the globe, then, I can deduce what you've said down to very simple language and say that it does sound, if you take out the emotional charged stuff that makes people feel, emotional, it's actually a very simple equation that powerful people have access to resources, and to maintain that, will try to maintain, power distance between themselves and others. And so, yeah, I think so. I think, but the piece that I don't know that I agree with is the motivated part. I mean, I don't think people consciously recognize that, oh, I have resources and I need to scramble to keep them, and oh, I need to subordinate others to, keep my status. I don't think that most people want to hurt others or want to subordinate others or want to, I think what I'm trying to say is that I bet a lot of people, in my scientific sense, is that many people would choose not to have power if they recognized what their power did to others, and that some other people would be very concerned if they realized that, having power led to this. and certainly most of those people would not agree with the fact that they actively subordinate others. I think that they would say that they try very hard not to, or they don't want to, or they don't mean to. At least that's what social science has to say about that.
Wow, this is going to be a great program, particularly as we get to your work. This is going to be a great program, particularly if you can stay honest. Right now, I would say you sound like you're making an effort to be pretty honest with us about this problem. If you can maintain that, and particularly if you can be as clear as possible, this will be a great program. My new response when people say, well, I don't think white people are consciously working to maintain a system of racism, white supremacy, my new response, I'm going to quote Professor Dana R. Carney's work and say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if they are consciously practicing racism, the default is set to racism, white supremacy. And I'm going to just point to your study, bam, even when they're unconscious, this is what the default is set to in a system of white supremacy, mistreat non-white people. And we'll walk to your work, and you can explain if that's true or not, if I just made a false statement according to your study. My co-host, I want to make sure I don't bump her out today. She's on the line, and she has some questions as well, I think, about your wonderful work. She's younger, so I definitely want to make sure I ask if you can try to use a lower vocabulary level, because I want to make sure that we don't miss any of the great information. That would be really helpful. Can you make an effort to do that for us?
I will make every effort.
Okay, thank you. Can I prompt you if I feel like you're leaving us in the trails, because we might not have all the education and stuff that you do. So that would be very
sorry. Yes, I try to be accessible. You're bringing up these Nietzschean ideas, and so I can't help but talk about them. But I will try to. I'll try to remember that I'm talking to just more than just you.
Thank you. You can bring up the Nietzsche. That's great. Just, make it accessible so I can get it. That would be great. My friend loves Nietzsche. Okay, Coach Justice, if you're there and you have some questions. Do you want Dr. Carney, Professor Carney? Do you have a preference?
You can call me Dana, if that's all right with you.
No problem. Dana it is. Justice, if you have some questions you would like to ask Dana, go right ahead.
Hi, Justice.
What do you mean when you say justice?
Say it again.
What do you mean when you say justice?
What do I mean when I say justice? That's an interesting question. I don't know that I've thought about that a lot. What do I mean when I say justice? Well, I don't know that I say justice that often. When I do, if I do, I think I mean that people should have what, I'm not sure what I think. Because I break it into pieces. So people are born with certain rights, right? I think that once a person's born, they should have a right to life, and they should have a right to not have other people hurt them, and they should have a right, a path that should allow them to, sort of rise to the extent that they want to, and that path should be clear. And I think that, so there's that piece of it. And then there's, a just outcome is that if when people are acting in the world, when they engage in some kind of behavior, that whatever action or behavior that they engage in, that the reaction is commensurate with that. In other words, that the reaction that comes back is, at the same level, or one that makes sense for the action that was expressed to begin with. So I think that's what I mean. I think that's what justice means to me. I think that there are different levels of it, and there's different ways of thinking about it. But just off the top of my head, those are my initial thoughts.
What is a white person?
Did you ask what is a white person?
Yes.
What is a white person? I don't know. I don't know what a white person is. I mean, if you look at evolutionary history, everyone came from Africa. So I'm not really sure. I guess a white person would be a human that over time migrated to northern regions where their skin didn't need to be dark because there wasn't that much sunlight, and so over time their skin color got lighter and lighter. I mean, that's like, the sort of evolutionary, most basic version of what a white person is. But if you ask, the socially conscious Dana, the person that studies issues that are, that have to do with racial bias and discrimination and health disparity and race and things like that, a white person then is something different, right? A white person then is an individual that across the globe tends to have more social power, tends to have more access to resources, tends to have the ability to get through life in a way that's different than others. And so those are the thoughts that come to mind.
What is the definition of expert?
The definition of expert. I would say that an expert is probably an individual who has had some degree of experience with something, either firsthand experience, so they've had this experience through their own lives, or they've learned about it and they understand something intellectually or mentally, and that expert is only an expert because they tend to know more about a particular issue than other people. And we do know that, in social psychology and in science more broadly, an expert, the mind of an expert works a little bit differently than the mind of a non-expert. So if you have an expert in a particular topic, let's say, you're an expert with fish, you know fish really well, you are going to see a fish and it's going to have different meaning for you than a non-fish expert, because that fish is going to be categorized more specifically. You're going to know what kind of fish it is and what kinds of waters it tends to live in and what it likes to eat and what likes to eat it. And so you're going to have all of this additional stuff that comes up mentally for you when you see that fish. A non-expert like me would just say, oh, that's a fish, it's like every other fish. You don't see the sort of granularity or the fine differences in things. So from a cognitive or mental standpoint, an expert is someone whose mind kind of knows more deeply, either through firsthand experience or by learning about something, more so than the average person, for example.
Okay, that'll be all for now.
Say it again?
That will be all for now.
All right.
Groovy. The context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, Justice, and Dana R. Carney. I was really appreciating that explanation of expert. That made a lot of sense. 2 thumbs up on being accessible to everyone. I guess before we hop into some of the specific studies that you've done, 2 things I wanted to touch on because I think it's relevant, and I think people will have a greater appreciation for the information that you share as we go. Nonverbal communication. Can you kind of give, I guess, a brief summary of your expertise in nonverbal communication, what that means, what you look for, and particularly how power and dominance is conveyed through nonverbal communication?
Sure. So nonverbal communication is all the stuff we do with our faces and bodies on purpose. So when you're happy, you smile naturally, automatically. Other people can see that, and they sometimes feel good too because you're feeling good. It also can communicate, I really like the gift that you gave me. Nonverbal facial expressions evolved to be able to help each other in groups. So you can imagine a group of people that maybe didn't have verbal communication yet, and there was some scary bear or some predator coming into the village, and so my fear expression rapidly comes across my face, and all the other villagers see my fear expression, and they know, oh, that means something bad is going to happen, find safety. So there's these kinds of facial expressions that we're all familiar with: happy, sad, angry, fearful, and all of that. But then there are, more global kinds of body postures that we have. So when you look at someone more or nod your head in agreement, you're really kind of connecting with them, and you're sending a message. Yeah, I'm with you. I get you. I get what's going on. I'm gazing at you. I'm making eye contact. So there's lots of things we do with our bodies. I'm sure all of your listeners can think of a million different nonverbal cues that come up. We also have emblems. So, if you wanted to describe to someone what a corkscrew looked like, let's say it was you were describing some picture that you saw at a museum or something, and you're like, it looks like this. You would make a little sign with your finger winding down like a corkscrew. That's called an emblem. So there are different kinds of nonverbal cues. What's interesting about nonverbal communication is that we use it on purpose to convey things to people, like, don't you have something to say, Gus? Isn't it your turn to talk now? And you might look at the person and put your hand out to say, oh, it's your turn to talk. So we use, we make these nonverbal displays on purpose to communicate very specific things to people. My interest in it is a little more subtle. Rather, I'm interested in more subtle versions of nonverbal communication. I'm very interested in the tiny little things that we do that kind of reveal what's going on in our minds. And sometimes you don't even realize you're revealing these things. So your listeners might know that, or might not know, that when you like someone, you'll sit just a little bit closer to them than you would. And by like, I mean, you like someone, not necessarily like have romantic feelings, although it's true of romantic feelings as well. But when we like something or someone, an object, a particular pillow, an individual, we'll sit a little closer to them. We're more likely to touch that object or that person. We might look at that person or that object more often. And you might not even realize that you're doing this, but you do these very tiny little things. And these cues send signals to other people that are watching or to the person that you're communicating with. And I'm very, very interested in these tiny little things that we do that send messages, not only to the person with whom we're interacting, but to other people that are looking at us, because they give away what's going on in our minds. They give away whether we like this person, or whether we're feeling good right now, or whether we're lying. And so that is a kind of basic background on what nonverbal communication is. I should probably back up just a moment and say that nonverbal communication evolved before verbal communication did. So it's something that, even animals, like if for any of your listeners that have dogs or cats, like cats in particular, if you call their name, their little ears, like their ears have all these different ways of moving around. They signal different things, and pet owners in your audience will know that they read their animals by these nonverbal cues. Like these are things that, in babies as well, we read babies crying. Different kinds of cries mean different kinds of things. These are all considered nonverbal cues. And what's interesting is that we're not sure in science yet whether nonverbal cues link directly to our unconscious minds, but there does appear to be some evidence that you can have a thought. By thought, I mean broadly. Like you can have a concept deep in your mind activated. It becomes sort of unconsciously activated and it's simmering back there. You don't even consciously recognize that this idea has been activated, but it's back there. And it can reveal itself through different nonverbal cues. So a really classic example of this is some of the work that's been done on racial bias. So this is some work that I did for my dissertation and lots of other people. So Jack DeVideo has done some of this work, and I could name names. But essentially, when you were talking earlier about, everyone's racist and even if they don't want to be, their minds are, there's a lot of truth to that. And, something like 85% of white people demonstrate some degree of racial bias against non-white people. In particular, white Americans having racial bias against black Americans. Most of the work that has been done has been on those two social groups. And so, even though you don't want to be racially biased, this stuff is simmering back there because of your socialization, because of what's on the television, because of what's in the movies, because, the sort of things that you've seen in your life. And you have these biases that are sort of simmering, and they leak out in that you might look, a white person might look a little less. They might gaze a little less at a black person with whom they're interacting. They might sit a little further away from them. And so these are the kinds of things I think that I'm particularly interested in, these unconscious thoughts that you have. You're not even aware that you're having them, and they're leaking out through nonverbal cues that are absolutely affecting the people with whom you're interacting and absolutely influencing onlookers. And so those are the sort of cues, the nonverbal cues I'm really passionate about trying to understand, because I think those are the most damaging ones, the ones that we don't even realize. The thoughts that we don't realize we're having are leaking out in behaviors that we don't realize we're expressing. Wow. And then just to jump aside to the question that you asked, tell me about some of the cues associated with dominance and power. So it looks like there was a really nice summary of the literature on the nonverbal expression of power and dominance and status. And it looks like there are a few behaviors that are consistently associated with having more power or status. One of them is really interesting. My listeners will find this to be very interesting, but people or more, they look more, they gaze more, they'll look at you more while they are speaking relative to how much time they look at you while you are speaking. So I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if you've ever been at a meeting or with a group of friends, as a woman I can tell you that, when I'm speaking, I'm looking at everyone, and then, but other people I notice are not looking so much at me, especially men. So I'll see especially very dominant men. So I'll see a very dominant man won't look at me when I'm talking. I'm like, I'm talking. I have a PhD even. Can you look at me when I'm talking? And so it's this interesting phenomenon that, people who are high in power will look at you while they're talking, but not while you are. So that is something, visual dominance ratio, which is very consistently associated with power dominance status. There's also taking up more space. So people who have a lot of power, they'll take up space, so their bodies will take up space. They'll spread out their limbs more. They'll kind of sit back in their chair with their feet extended out. I'm just giving an example, but any way in which the body can physically take up more space, arms on the table kind of more spread out. And their stuff, if they have stuff like a backpack with stuff in it, they might spread it all around. Or their food, they might have a plate and then their appetizer plate and then their bread plate and their forks over here and their water glasses over there. They're just dominating a whole 5 square feet of the dinner table. So taking up space is a cue that people with power or status engage in. Another one is having open body postures. So they tend to sit or stand with more open body postures, which means you can see more of their chest and their stomach. So they they don't have their limbs, their arms aren't crossing over their chest or their arms aren't so much folded. They're more kind of open, sort of as if to say, I have nothing to hide and I'm not afraid of you. And then there's also touch. So people who are higher in power. So do you remember George Bush used to always like slap people on the cheeks? I don't know if you've ever noticed that.
Yes,
Okay. So to me, that meant like I have power. Like touching someone's face is very intimate. I mean, I couldn't imagine being touched on the face by any of my colleagues. I could not imagine that. And he would just smack people on the faces in this very kind of invasive, touching way. That's a way in which power dominance is also signaled. Touching, but almost kind of like an invasive way. Touching a leg in a way that is reserved for intimate partners, or touching the face, which is not really that appropriate. So I'm not saying that was George Bush's motivation. I don't know him, but I can tell you that that kind of touch is the kind of touch that is a little bit indicative of having power or status dominance. Those are the big ones.
Fascinating information. And I think as we transition to your research, some of the specific studies you've done, I think listeners will see how all of this relates to racism when we get there. But I guess I wanted to ask a quick one. I guess denying physical contact, is that, does that factor in if you're denying physical contact in any way?
Well, that's interesting. So I can talk about how that's related to racism. So touch is a touchy thing. So touch is confusing because on one hand it means intimacy and closeness and liking, but invasive touching is like, it could be a signal of power. It's like I can touch you if I want to. But your question seems more linked to the idea of intimacy touching. So, not touching someone, withholding, it's kind of like, if you're a person with, if it's in a wheelchair, or you have a stutter, or you're not the same race as me, I might not touch you. It's kind of like I don't want to touch you. So that's really, so the research that's done typically looks at, the extent of the liking for someone and how much they touch. But the inverse of that is, a lack of touching. You asked about withholding touch, which is a little bit different. It feels, it's a qualitatively different kind of behavior. And I don't know if I'm racking my brain to think of any research that's looked at withholding. It's a difficult thing to scientifically examine because it implies some willful act of withholding, and that's difficult to get at. I can certainly observe lack of touching, but to know whether you're withholding touch, I would need to observe lack of touching and then get at some underlying motivation behind that. So, but it's a really interesting question, and my sense would be that you absolutely withhold touching things that you don't like. There's like this disgust, sort of like the disgust response, like I'm not going to touch or smell or be near that object. But with regard to power, it's interesting because just as a layperson, so just as an ordinary person, because I'm also an ordinary person, I often remember times where people that had more power than me, they wouldn't be as expressive, and it made me feel powerless because I couldn't read them. I didn't know how they felt. And that's kind of like what you're asking about. It's like lack of touching. It's a lack of information. It's a withholding of nonverbal information, and how is that meaningful? And I've often thought about how it is meaningful because I know that I personally feel very powerless when I'm interacting with a person who's withholding nonverbal cues of all kinds. I feel very much off-put, like, ooh, I'm not worthy of their expression, kind of. So those are my thoughts on the question.
Very interesting. I guess this will be my last one before we hop into the studies. For folks who might not be aware, could you share a little bit about the implicit association test and how that is relevant to racism?
Sure. So, excuse me. How much of history do you want, small, medium, or large?
Let's go medium.
All right, let's go medium. So, about, I guess, 15 years ago now, it became clear that asking people how much racial bias they have was not the whole picture. You could ask people all day long, and everyone says, "Oh, I'm egalitarian. I don't have racial bias." But yet, you look at things like, healthcare disparity, and the fact that Jamel and Tyrone are much less likely to get jobs than Eric and John, and you say, what's going on here? Like, there's clear disparities in the world. So how can, on one hand, all of these people that are white say, oh, I have no racial bias, but yet you have all of these ethnic groups saying or demonstrating that they're not getting the same access to care, they're not getting the same level of care when they do have the access. There's more problems. They're not getting the same jobs. So it doesn't add up. And so researchers about 15 years ago started to use these complex tools that come out of memory research and come out of research on cognition, come out of research on the brain and the mind. And they started to use these tools to get at the associations in the mind between different concepts. So, for example, if I tell you that I don't have a problem with spiders, that spiders and I, whatever. If I see one, I just push it out the door. I get rid of it. But if you ask me to think of a word, if you give me, half of a second to think of a word, the first word that comes to mind when I see a picture of a spider, I'm going to think of the word yuck or ew or scary or something like that. So while consciously I might tell you that I'm not afraid of spiders and that I deal with them just fine, deeper in my mind is a clear link between spiders and fear, between spiders and yucky, between spiders and all of these bad concepts. So where that comes from is not clear. It may come from, the media. It can come from your family's socialization. It certainly comes from, in your environment, without a doubt. It's not clear where in the environment these associations come from, but they come from your upbringing. They come from the culture that you were raised in. These associations are about all manner of things, so all kinds of different things, including social groups. So as you started this program off, white people power, white people have the resources, white people all this stuff. Like I'm polluting your listeners' minds right now by saying those things all together. Okay, so we're gonna I'm gonna de-bias you really quickly. So non-white people powerful, non-white people amazing, non-white people strong, non-white people access to resources. Okay, the reason I did that was just because whatever associations I just created, I wanted to create other ones too. So the idea is that when two things are said together or happen together, or that you observe them happening in the world on the television or in your life, your brain goes beep, 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 beep. It just like links those two things together or those three things together. And so essentially there are, you can imagine all these different social groups in your mind. You have different words and concepts and ideas that are linked to them. So stereotypes. You've heard of stereotypes before, obviously. There's certain kinds of stereotypes for every ethnic group. It's like blonde white women are dumb and ditzy and whatever stereotypes you have about people like me. Oh, you're a college professor. You don't look like one. That's what I get sometimes. You look like a trophy wife, or not that. You look like whatever. I look like something that's not what I am. And so then you have other people that have other kinds of stereotypes. These come from the culture that we live in, that we see on television or we see on in the movies. And so what happens is that they don't just sit there inactive. The problem is that they actually affect or infect the way that we see the world. They're a filter. They're a filter through which we see the world. They're a filter that we, use decisions, especially when those decisions are under, time constraint, when we're pressured to make a quick decision, when we're stressed out. And so the IAT stands for the Implicit Association Test, and what it measures is the link in your mind between different concepts and how strong that link is. So if I am a really racially biased white person and I really, let's say I dislike green people a lot, I might on a conscious level say, oh, green people and white people, they're equal, they're fine, I like them the same. But deep in my mind, because my culture has trained me to believe that green people are, they're cheap and green people are, dangerous, that deep in my mind is going to be a very clear link between green and green people and green groups of people and cheap and dangerous and all of these bad concepts. And the problem is that when I'm walking down the street and I see a green person walking towards me, I am going to be a little more afraid. I am going to be maybe walk across the street and walk on the other side of the street. I'm going to engage in behaviors that tap into this kind of like stuff simmering in my mind. And I might not hire a green person, and I might not want to be friends with a green person. And so the IET essentially is just a cognitive reaction time measure that's able to gauge the strength of the association between different social groups. Well, it actually can measure anything, but it's most famous for measuring links between different, how much you like or don't like different social groups. And by like and don't like, I mean deep in your mind, kind of, the culture leaving its thumbprint on your mind. And the extent to which that residue or that pollution is back there simmering. And you can get a score for each individual person and how kind of on average, how strong is that link, how strong is that association between green people and dangerous, and how much that link actually drives their behavior, how much it accounts for whether they hire green people or whether they sit close to green people or whether they're likely to treat green people in the doctor's office. And so that's what the IAT is. That's what it measures. And it can be used to predict or correlate with all kinds of different outcomes that are meaningful to us.
I guess really quick, I'm going to check Justice to see if she has more questions. But would it be accurate, the example that you just shared with us, if we inserted black people in for green people, would that example still hold true?
So I wasn't using stereotypes about black people in. There certainly there's a lot of evidence. In fact, the bulk of the research on, I wouldn't say the bulk, but a large percentage of the research on implicit racial bias has been done on looking at, how much white people have these negative associations with black people. And so, yes, the research is, at this point, it's about 85% of white people show a slight to moderate to strong degree, link between unpleasant concepts and black Americans.
I think it would be accurate to say that the converse is probably true, that in addition to the suffocating amount of negative associations that are made every day with black people, non-white people, that there are just as many positive connections made with whiteness, white people, and I think that is every bit as damaging.
Totally.
Dana R. Carney, assistant professor, Colombia Business School. Justice, do you have some questions you would like to ask Dana?
How can you tell when a white person is telling the truth about racism and white supremacy?
How can I tell if a white person is telling the truth about racism, white supremacy? Is that what you asked, Justice? So whether they're telling the truth. Well, I can tell you what lies are like. So when people lie, there are definitely some cues that can reveal that they're lying. So we can look at the flip side of that to look at telling the truth. So when people lie, they speak a little more quickly. Their voice goes up a little bit. They have a little bit less content in what they're saying. They do some funky nonverbal things where they sometimes will press their lips together a little bit. They're a little bit less nice, so they are not so warm, or they're not so kind of kind and warm is probably the best way to think about it. They're kind of like, they're a little more cold when they're lying. So if a white person is talking about, race-related issues or, racism or white supremacy, as you say, and if they're telling the truth, if they're giving you their honest responses, they're probably more likely to be more forthcoming. Maybe they will have more to say. People who don't have a lot to say kind of might be more likely to be lying than someone who kind of like has more to say about it. I think that the warmth idea, the idea that they would be more warm and kind of open and kind about the discussion, would probably be a really good cue to look for, because when people are uncomfortable talking about an issue, or they're lying, or they don't want to talk about an issue, they kind of clam up and they get cold and they get kind of mean. And so by mean, it's very subtle. I mean, I don't mean really mean. I mean kind of mean. And so, you might, if you want to talk about race-related issues with a white person, I would look for cues that indicate that they're comfortable with the conversation, that they're open about it, that they're kind of warm and, having a discussion about something interesting to them. Those would probably be the cues that I would look for to see if they're telling the truth.
Do you think your work is constructive in working against racism and white supremacy? If so, how is it constructive?
Well, I don't know if it's constructive or not. I definitely know that I'm trying to understand racism. I'm trying to understand some of the subtle ways in which it's perpetuated. The whole story can't just be, my parents sat me down and taught me to be a racist. It's that the subtle little things, that my mom squeezed my hand just a little more tightly when I was walking down the street when there was a person walking towards me that was non-white. And that message taught me, you should be a little bit more afraid of that person than you should be of other people. And those are the things that I think are really mind-blowing, that I want to understand. So I don't think that my research is constructive in the short term. What I hope is that it's constructive in the long term. And what I mean by that is that if we can get to the heart of, if we can say, hey, look, guys, there's this stuff, and it's pollution, and it's in your mind, and you might not think it's there, and you might not want it to be there, and you might not even believe it's there, but guess what? It is there, and you need to actively work to get rid of it, and that you are learning to be racist by these subtle little acts going on around you, and you might not think that you are because you don't laugh at a racist joke, but just hearing that racist joke, it makes those associations in your mind, and that any kind of pollution that you're exposing yourself to or allow yourself to be exposed to is shaping you. It's shaping how you see the world. So I would like us to get to that point so that we all kind of wake up and start to actively not be around people who pollution or so that eventually you end up pollution, right? Because if you socially ostracize the people, if you socially ostracize the polluters because now they have no friends, I mean, this is like fantasy land, right? But you could imagine a world in which that if you have racist ideas or thoughts, or you're willing to tell a racist joke, that no one wants to be your friend anymore. That person's going to change their ways, or rather their maybe grandchildren will be less likely to engage in that. And so I think that in my lifetime, what I'd like to see at a minimum is for everyone to just sort of wake up and say, okay, this stuff is here. I believe you. I know that it's there. I see myself get a little bit more afraid when I see this kind of person on the street or that kind of person on the street. I see myself less likely to want to hire this kind of person or that. So I believe you. And wow, my subtle nonverbal cues are not only leaking this stuff out and affecting people that I'm interacting with that might be non-white, but that other people observing us interacting are actually being polluted as well. Like, okay, enough is enough. Awareness, I think, has got to be the first step. And so anything I can do to chip away at that, to try to, make some change in that direction would be not enough, but it would be, it would be something. And so that's what I think about that.
How do you counter deception?
How do I do what? Counter
deception?
How do you counter deception? Whew, that's a tough one. By counter, so I'm not totally clear on what you mean. I think that one interpretation of your question could be, how do you change the game so that you can prevent people from lying to you? That's one way of interpreting what you said. So if I'm in a situation where someone could be lying to me, I have some tools that I can pull out to try to prevent that from happening. One is by being friends with them. It's much harder to lie to people that you're friends with. It's much harder to lie to people that you care about. And so that would be one approach. Another one is that you can increase the ability to know, I guess now I'm getting into the second way of interpreting it. Not how do you prevent it from happening in the first place, but how can you figure it out when it does? And so that's equally as difficult. I think that, one thing that we know that we can do is that you can apply pressure to people. You can make them have to respond quickly, or you can make them feel stressed out, or you can level the playing field and make them not feel like they have so much power, or that that you're on to them somehow. Like, don't lie to me. I know that you might not want to tell me the truth about this. That increases the kind of psychological pressure that a person feels and can help them. Well, rather, it can increase how much. It basically changes how good of a liar they are. Now, these aren't really hard and fast rules. So these don't necessarily always work, but this is what the research says that you can do. There are a couple of things you can do to kind of, make people worse at lying. I think your question might have been more the first one, which is, how do you prevent? How do you decrease the likelihood that someone might lie to you? And, there's not a whole lot to be said about that, because the truth is that a lot of people lie all the time. And we lie for good reasons, right? We lie to protect people's feelings. We lie to, oh, I really liked that sweater, Grandma. I promise it's great. The one that you spent 3 days knitting. I mean, it's horrible and you'd never wear the sweater, but you don't want to tell your grandmother that. So you lie to make it sort of seem like you do like it, because you don't want to hurt her feelings, really. So there are reasons why we lie that are not so bad, but the reasons, the bad lies are the ones where a person's trying to get resources that they don't deserve or didn't earn, or that they're trying to steal something or take something, and those are the tough situations. Or they did something bad and they're trying to cover it up. And so in those situations, it's definitely harder to lie to people that you care about. So I would say one of the best kind of ways of disarming people is to make them like you, and to be friends with them, and to find some common ground. Find a reason, so that give them a reason to not want to lie to you.
If you have more to say on the second interpretation? Please go ahead.
The second interpretation was to how can you read people better? Well, I can tell you that it's difficult because most of the research and stuff that we know about how to get people to tell the truth comes out of really aggressive sort of high-stakes situations where people are, they're in jail or they're being interrogated. They come out of like the interrogation literature. So, like police officers interrogating people and stuff like that. So we don't know, so my science doesn't really know that much about that research because it's more like white papers or like secret white papers that the FBI has or whatever about how to get people to tell the truth. And so it's not even clear whether those tactics are even that useful. But I can tell you that in my field, there are a couple of things. When you put a person under mental load, it's called cognitive load in my field, where you basically make them distracted. You kind of give them a whole lot of stuff to think about, or you make them have to do more than one thing at a time. You basically use up a lot of their mental energy. It then becomes very difficult to keep your story straight. So think about mental energy as a sort of a cup full of milk. Once you pour out half of the milk is gone. Mental energy is very much like that. It's finite. So if you only have a cup of brain power, you only have a cup of brain power. If I use up half of that cup of your brain power, making you do stuff like memorizing numbers or doing 3 tasks at a time, then what's left over is not really going to be that much, and you're not really going to be able to keep your story straight. You're not really going to be able to, stop yourself from, like leaking out little nonverbal cues that you're lying. You're not really going to be able to make yourself look like you're telling the truth or sound like you're telling the truth. So it's a nice. So, kind of jumping around when you're asking people questions is a good way to do it. So like you guys with me right now is a really good strategy to try to, this is true of lying, and it's also true of whether or not a person really knows what they're talking about. If you jump all over the place and you're dealing with a real expert, then, a person should, to some extent, be able to kind of go back and forth. It's hard. It's mentally taxing to have to do that. You spend lots of energy jumping around. I'm already getting exhausted jumping all over the place. But, a person that kind of knows what they're talking about a little bit should be able to do that with some ease. But a liar or a person that doesn't know, isn't an expert, is going to have a tough time. And so that's a really nice strategy, like jumping around, asking questions all over the place, because then it uses up all their energy, and it's very difficult for them to lie in a situation like that. Also, now there's no science to back up what I'm about to say, but my scientific intuition says that this would work. So when you're talking to someone about something specific, like a lying kind of a context, or rather, if you're talking to someone about something you think they might be lying about, there's this kind of natural flow of a conversation where you ease in a little bit, and then it kind of gets intense for a while, and then it kind of slopes down the other side. So you can imagine that a person's sort of body responds in a way that tracks with that increasing intensity and then comes down, slopes down the other side. So like, let's say I'm lying to you and you start off by, oh, Dana, are you tired today? I go, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine. My day's been great. And you start to like ask me really tough questions. Well, didn't you get up really early this morning? And haven't you done a million things today? And haven't you been running back and forth all day? And then I might get really intense and answer your questions. And then you sort of make me think I'm off the hook. You're like, okay, well, I believe you then. You must not be really tired after all. And I go, okay. Whew. So then physiologically I've relaxed because I think the hard part's over. And then if you like, wow, come out of the, out of the side with a whammy for me, say, and you ask me some other question that's related, then I'm not ready for it. I'm going to be kind of blindsided and go, whoa, and that would be another tool that you might be able to use, because you're kind of, you're taking advantage of the fact that the person has let their guard down, essentially, and you can come in and ask them that tough question again when they're not expecting it.
Thanks. Go ahead, Gus.
Context of white supremacy. Our guest, Dana R. Carney. Excellent information, as expected from an expert. The studies, I want to share as much info as I can. I want to make sure we can touch on all four, at least briefly. The first one that I would like to look at, this is this is people with power are better liars. If you could, I guess, give us as much relevant information as possible about this particular study. If you could do it in 5 minutes, that would be fantastic.
Okay, I'll try. Let's see. So I have been studying deception and nonverbal communication for a long time, and I noticed that there are certain things that happen to the mind and to the body when a person's lying. They get mentally taxed or spent. They feel bad. They don't think so quickly. They have a stress response. So there's a hormone that we have called cortisol, which increases when we're stressed out. And so they have, everyone knows what the lie detector test is, and the polygraph essentially measures the stress response. So there's, on one hand you have how does a human being respond when they're lying. So then, through graduate school and in the past couple of years, I've been studying power and dominance more and more. And, I'm looking at the way in which the body responds when it has power. And powerful people, they feel good. And they have all these extra mental resources. They have, it's kind of like they're extra sort of smart, sort of. And their bodies, they tend to have, lower levels of cortisol and higher levels of the dominance hormone testosterone, which sort of acts against cortisol. Sort of, it's a complex relationship, but basically, the higher you are in testosterone, in some cases, under some circumstances, your cortisol is lower. So I started to kind of.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Okay.
I thought that was very interesting. If you could just repeat that, and I'll share with the audience why I thought that was so fascinating.
Sure. And
I just inserted white. When you say powerful people, I just insert white for power, and so it reads, white people have better feelings and that dominance and da-da-da-da-da. And I was just like, yep, that still rings very true. I could be wrong, but if you could repeat that, that would be fantastic. Excellent info. Thank you.
Sure. So essentially, people that have power, they feel good, so they report feeling more positive. They also report, or they demonstrate on complex cognitive tasks that they're kind of smarter. They think more quickly. They process information more efficiently. They also don't get as stressed out. They sort of are physiologically kind of ready to deal with the world better. They're more likely to go for it. They kind of are like in this approach state where they're like, oh, let's go for it. Let's do that. That sounds good. So they're just sort of like mentally and physically kind of ready to go, and they're in a good place. And so when you look at a person, are you laughing?
That sounds like white people. That sounds like white people.
Well,
I could be wrong. That sounds like white people to me. In the system of white supremacy.
It's so interesting. I mean, I think that, even if you look at the endocrine profile, so by endocrine I'm talking about these hormones. So, one of the things so this is a little bit off topic, but on topic at the same time, in some of my research that we're not going to talk about today, I found that if you make people do power poses, where they sort of take up space and have these dominant postures, for 2 minutes, a little power pose, like you kick your feet up on the desk and you put your hands behind your back like the CEO in the boardroom. that person's hormone profile changes. Their testosterone increases, their dominance hormone, and their cortisol, their stress hormone, decreases. This is after a 2-minute power pose. And one of the first things, so your listeners may know Susan Fisk's work. Do you know Susan Fisk's work at all? So she's someone who's studied different social groups, and she's one of the sort of mavens of my field in terms of racial bias and stereotypes. And so her student, Amy Cuddy, and I did this work. And one of the first things we thought of, which would be so fantastic, is like if you can, so Claude Steele, have you guys heard of stereotype threat research, where if you have black people and white people and you bring them into a room and you have them take a test, and before they take that math test, they report their race, that you'll see disparities in, do we have a minute left or something?
Oh, no, ma'am. Go right ahead. You're fine.
Okay. Oh, I heard a funny noise, so I thought it was like a little commercial time or something. Okay. So if you bring white and black people into a testing room and you have them report their race before the math test, you'll see that the whites will outperform the blacks. Will do slightly better. But if you bring those same people into a room and you don't have them report their race, they do equally as well. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that the black students did do better than the white students. So what the heck is going on here? Simply reminding people, oh, hey, guess what? You're a social group. There's stereotypes about it, and you guys don't do so good at math, so you're probably not going to do so well. So this is called stereotype threat. And so one implication of this that we're all just amazed at is why the SAT, so the college entrance exams, the first thing you do is report your race and gender, right? Which is just the stupidest thing. So anyhow, just to get to the point, my colleague Amy Cuddy and I thought that what we could do is, I wonder if we could eradicate the stereotype threat effect by having participants, subjects in our study, do these power poses. Like, essentially, can we offset some of the impact of racial bias and discrimination by giving people power, by giving black people power in a situation? Can we eradicate some of these performance effects that we see that are a function of belief in the stereotype, not the fact that they're this group or that, but that they buy in somehow on some unconscious level to the stereotype that they're not supposed to do as well. So when you say that, it rings true to me. I mean, that's one of the first thoughts we had is like, how can we use this for good? How can we use this idea of giving people power? If you can really if you can't give people power by giving them a higher social standing or, status or whatever instantly, but if you can make their bodies respond physiologically as if they had power, you could really, really do a lot of good. And so that is one of the first things we thought of. So I think that I don't disagree with you that this idea of the physiological profile of a white person is a lot like the physiological profile of a black person, and we know this already. And so yes, I would have to say that that you're onto something there. And so then, just to get back to my 5 minutes that are probably already up about describing this study, I will do my best to sum it up in 30 seconds or less. Essentially, it became clear to me that the very same sort of systems infused by having power were the same systems depleted by the act of telling a lie. And so we brought people into the lab, and we did these classic sort of power manipulations, these very rich kind of, this is all lab studies, but they're very realistic interactions that we give people power in these social situations where we make them powerless. And then we have them do this mock crime. So this is an experimental approach that's taken directly from the criminal justice literature, where you basically people either have to steal or not steal $100, but everybody has to convince the experimenter that they didn't take the money. And what you end up with, and if you convince the experimenter that you didn't take the money, you actually get to keep it. So they walk in thinking that they're just doing a little study for 45 minutes, and they realize they get a chance to make $100, and so they're very motivated. These are college students. They're very motivated to get the $100. So you end up with a situation in which you have liars and truth tellers that are either high-powered or low-powered. And what we found was that the high-powered liars looked in every way like the truth tellers. They didn't have stress response. They didn't show sort of evidence that they were mentally impaired or mentally taxed by this. Because usually when you lie, it's like it takes up all these cognitive resources to keep your story straight, to keep your act together. And these people are sort of depleted. If you give them a mental test after, they sort of don't do so well. But you saw that these high-powered liars just appeared in every way totally resilient to the stressor of telling a lie. And so, and it was just the people that were low-powered were the ones that looked like normal people, people that don't have power, that just sort of aren't given a whole bunch of power, basically look like the low-powered liars, where they showed stress response, and their cortisol went up after the interview, and they had all these nonverbal tells that sort of, they looked all funny when they were on videotape talking about whether they stole the money, and they didn't do so well on the cognitive task after, and so on.
I want to see if we can get as much info as possible from I think, fabulous information, extremely relevant to racism, white supremacy, which I feel is primarily run through deception. So I think this is all extremely relevant. My thoughts just from her sharing that about the report and when I read it was, I would think in a system where you're already conditioned to devalue non-white people, especially black people, in addition to all of the kudos that you get, even the physiological benefits that you get from being powerful, i.e. a white person, it has got to be cake to practice deception with a non-white person if you're a white person. If you, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, when you said that, so Gus emailed me and said a couple of things about what we were going to talk about, and you actually gave me a bunch of really interesting research ideas. I mean, I don't know that we know. I bet you it's much easier for white people to lie to black people, and it may even be easier for black people to lie to white people than it is for black people to lie to black people. Just on the so there's two forces at play here. One being that it's harder to lie to people that you're like, or that look like you, or that are like you, or that you feel connected to. So there's that piece that we've kind of talked about earlier. But then there's the power dynamic, right? So if it's true that majority group members or dominant group members, have power or feel more powerful, certainly when they're in the presence of an individual that's from a social group that has considerably less power, it's going to be, they're going to sort of feel even more powerful because they're going to be reminded of how much power they have. They're like, oh, I'm in the powerful group. And so that's actually a really amazing research question that has not been asked, that, that sort of looking at deception in the intergroup context. I'd be very interested. Maybe we should do some studies together on that because I think that there's a lot that could be done that would be relevant to, trying to understand how racism is perpetuated. And, I mean, gosh, think about it. If it is easier for white people to lie to black people, like, okay, there's a piece of the puzzle, right?
I think that's a huge part of the puzzle, and I think non-white people, and I think your research bears this out. This is why I thought this white girl has got to come on the show. If you are in the subordinate group, right, it is easier for you to be, or I guess first, let's start from the baseline. People are poor at picking out liars. That's just the baseline in general. Yep. People are poor at picking out liars. So then you add on to that being a non-white person and all of the ickiness that you get as a result of white supremacy. That white person with all that power is given more credibility, more validity. I mean, it's set up for you to believe white people, and it's set up for it to be really easy for them to be deceptive to non-white people. I mean, it just creates an environment it creates exactly what I see every day, total domination, where you got one group that's trained to be good at deception, another group that's trained to be duped, easily duped, and I just see that play out every day.
You know what? You're right. It has to be the case. Like everything that you've just said adds up. I mean, this is what we do as scientists, as we put together pieces of the puzzle and we say, this has to be the case. We have to know the answer to this. While, if we did that study and got it published, people might say, duh, like we knew that all along, but we don't actually know that. But I would bet everything on the fact that that's got to be the case. It just has to be. It's totally set up. And wow, like what a, God, that's messed up, you know? Talk about a
I concur.
Talk about a self-perpetuating system, right?
Designed to be so. Designed to be so. Just the language is even encoded with it. The term fair is like a double whammy. I talk about that on the program all the time, how just a term that connotes whiteness or white and justice, validity, correctness. I mean, that is an incredible act of racism that gets carried around every time someone says, you're not treating me fairly, you're not treating me whitely. Is that fair? Is that accurate? I mean, that is an incredible act of embedded racism, white supremacy that people tote around all day long, every day, and don't even think about it.
Yeah, I have never thought about that. That's very interesting.
Let's see. Let's see if we can do. I think I'm going to have to skip one, unfortunately. I will skip. I will skip the study on implicit bias among physicians and its prediction of thrombolysis decisions for black and white patients. However, that is a great study. If you want to check it out, it's linked on her site. If you email me, I can get it to you. I will read the conclusion before we go to the next study. The conclusion that she picked out from that study, she says, this study represents the first evidence of unconscious, implicit race bias among physicians. Its disassociation from conscious, explicit bias and its predictive validity. Results suggest that physicians' unconscious bias may contribute to racial, ethnic disparities in the use of medical procedures such as thrombolysis for myocardial infarction. I hope I pronounced words correctly.
I won't correct you. It's okay.
Should have corrected. I'm all about being corrected if I say something.
Okay, all right. Thrombolysis. It's with a word I never heard before. And myocardial infarction. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Expert. That's why she's
expert. Oh yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, that study, basically these physicians, the racism, white supremacy showed up. Even when asked, they didn't have any explicit racial bias when asked about it explicitly, but that implicit association test that we talked about, that ended up being a great predictor for whether or not the black person would get worse treatment from the physician, the results from the implicit association test. Did I give an accurate summary?
Yep. And I think I think the bottom line is this, that nobody's immune, that even doctors who work really hard to be egalitarian and who really want to be for the most part, that they're not immune either.
I don't think anyone's immune, and I think that study, devastating illustration of how this unconscious racism that everybody gets programmed with, how it does have an impact of what I said earlier. I'll be referencing Dana R. Carney when people say, well, it's not conscious, it doesn't matter. The unconscious racism is there. That's what the default is set to for white people in a system of white supremacy, mistreat because they are not white. That's the default, and we would need to be honest about that. Can you get them, because this is also incredibly important, can we get if you can do like 7 minutes or less, 7 minutes or less on attitude contagion. Others' racial attitudes can subtly influence your own. Yes.
So I'm trying to collect my thoughts so that I can get them down to 7 minutes. The bottom line is this, that white people who have different, racial biases against different non-white people, we express them in these subtle little ways that the non-white people know. They can tell. They can feel it. They can see it. They know. But we don't even realize we're doing it, right? White people don't even have any clue that this is happening. And we might even say, oh, I don't want to be biased, and I try to be egalitarian. But the truth is that you look a little less. You don't touch as much. You sit a little further away from. You don't smile quite as much. You don't nod your head quite as much. So that's bad enough as it is. But what this study showed is that observing that interaction. So imagine that we see, Jane and Sarah, and they're having a social interaction. Jane is black and Sarah is white, and they're talking about whatever. And I'm seeing the white person kind of engage in these little bit negative verbal behaviors. And Gus and I are hanging out, having our own conversation, and we're watching this social interaction. Merely watching the subtle nonverbal cues of negativity directed at a black person is polluting my mind, is polluting both of our minds. In fact, watching that transaction, that subtle transaction, that transmission of racial bias that's kind of leaking out through these subtle nonverbal cues actually infects my own mind and changes my own level of racial bias. So if I see a white person behaving kind of mean toward a black person, I actually catch the person's racial bias. So to the extent that that white person is racially biased, it actually makes me more racially biased. But here's the good news. If I see someone who's really pro-black or who's really pro-whatever, who's very, egalitarian, they really like the other social group member, they really like that social group, they truly are not biased. If I see that behavior, I actually become less biased. So I think that, the good and bad of the study is basically that these behaviors that are leaking out and affecting, people, all of us, your listeners, me as a woman, anyone who, has stereotypes or biases about them or against them, that they not only affect us as the recipient of them, but they're affecting other people that are just merely observing us as the target of those biases, of the sexism, of the racism, and that's interesting, right? It's problematic. So let's not talk about how deeply problematic it is. Let's talk about how, this is how I think a majority of racial bias and stereotypes are transmitted. We see them on television in these more egregious ways, but they start when we're children. They start with that story that I told you about my mother squeezing my hand when the black dude is walking towards me down the street, and then minutes later when the white dude's walking down towards me down the street, she doesn't squeeze my hand so tight. That hand squeeze, I know, is a sign of that object is to be afraid of. That object is not to be afraid of. And those cues of fear get associated with the person that I just saw. And I think that, the transmission of racial bias begins when we're very, very young in these little subtle, nonverbal ways. And then not only is it socialized directly, but we see it all around us. And that, like I said, listening to that racial joke is problematic on so many levels. Not only because it's creating associations in your mind, but that you're sort of they're creating associations in your mind not only in terms of concepts and words and ideas, but also in terms of the nonverbal cues that person's expressing, the laughter and the disgust expression or the anger or whatever nonverbal expression that they're having. There's so many different things that are kind of creeping in. And so I think that in summary, because I have 7 minutes and those 7 minutes are ticking away, I will say that I think what's of most concern is that when you are the target of discrimination or prejudice, it's not just you that's that's bearing the brunt of this. Even the white people around you observing that act are actually learning to become more biased too. So that single act just doesn't affect the one target of the racism or the discrimination. It's actually affecting all kinds of people, not in a direct way. So if you see an act of discrimination in front of you, that it's not like, I should go out and make the world a more just place. Au contraire. Actually, what's happening is that in your brain, you just became a little more racist because you just linked bad acts and bad words and mean stuff with that, social group member.
Blonde white girl, Dana R. Carney, expert. I hope you all are finding the information.
Stop with the blonde white girl.
Very constructive information. Before I'm going to go to Justice, see if she has some questions, but I again want to remind folks, we get to this, this is the last study we want to do today, judgments of prejudice when expression reveals and overcorrection conceals. Again, the 5 films, Shawshank Redemption, As Good as It Gets, The Green Mile, The Matrix, and Pulp Fiction. Those are the 5 films. Keep that in mind. Justice, if you have some questions, please go right ahead.
What do you enjoy about being a blonde white girl?
I'm sorry. I know that you mean that with all seriousness, but that's funny. You know, I should have never said that, Gus. Okay, I should have never said that. Let's see. What do I enjoy about being a blonde white girl?
Lower cortisol level?
Yes, lower cortisol level, higher testosterone. Oh, yeah, actually, right. So, you know, there's an ideal in our state. Growing up, so I grew up in California. Are you guys in LA?
I'm in Washington State.
You're in Washington State, okay. So for some reason I thought you were in LA. I grew up in Northern California, and you know, there's a lot of pressure to be beautiful and blonde hair and all of this. And, you know, these ideals of beauty infected me. And I still to this day, despite the fact that a majority of my time is spent doing research and studying and, you know, working on my science, I still, you know, I'm very insecure about the way that I look, and I always want to look good, and I still like go to the hair salon and spend way too much money on my hair, and I straighten it and I blow it out and I spend all this money dyeing it blonde. So I'm not sure that I enjoy being a white blonde girl. I think that I'm relieved that I'm not non-white. I think that I would suffer. Life would be harder for me if I were not white. It would be more difficult for me to get health care. Once I got it, it would be more difficult for me to get the prescriptions that I needed. It would be harder for me to get a job. It would just be like, I mean, I study these issues. I know. And I'm not going to deny the fact that I live a life of more privilege than I would if I were non-white. So I'm quite sure that I enjoy being white in ways that I don't even understand. The blonde part is a whole different bag of worms. I think the blonde part is more about, you know, sort of desiring being, you know, sort of trying to appeal to this ideal that I grew up, this pollution that I was raised with. This is what you're supposed to look like. This is what you look like when you're pretty. This is what you should. This is the color that your hair should be to feel good about yourself. So I actually think that the blonde part is actually a little bit of a tax for me. It's almost like a burden that I bear. You know, it's like this, it's evidence of my insecurity. It's evidence of my need to fit in. The white part is different, so I would separate them out. I'm not sure I even answered the question. What do I enjoy about it? I think I enjoy being a white girl in ways that I don't even understand or comprehend. I don't know that I enjoy being a blonde girl. I think it's more of something I feel like I have to do because, you know, we are all trying to rid ourselves of our socialization in many ways, and there are many parts of my socialization that I cannot rid myself of, and continuing to spend too much money dyeing my hair blonde is probably one of them. Ready for the next question?
Do you think it's better to be a blonde white girl rather than a non-white female?
Do I think it's better to be a blonde white girl rather than a non-white female?
Yes.
So by better, do you mean do I think that the world will offer me things that it will if I'm a non-white person? Is that what you're asking? Well, let me assume that that's what you're asking. Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I think the world rewards light skin. I think the world rewards light hair. I think the world rewards people who, sort of have certain kinds of personalities and certain kinds of privileged upbringings, and there's no doubt. So by better, do I think that the world is more, it was easier for me? Do I think it was easier for me to get a PhD? Well, I can say I come from fairly humble beginnings. You don't know, my background. I haven't told you about it, but neither of my parents are educated. They both are immigrants. So I come from very humble beginnings. So that said, without a doubt, it was easier for me to kind of, get through college and to get people to help me and to get people to believe in me and to give people, to give me the benefit of the doubt. I think that the world is an easier place to navigate for people that are white than it is for people that are non-white. I don't think there's any question about that. Better, I don't know if that's what you meant by better, then there's no question.
How do you function around non-white people compared to how you function with white people?
It's changed over time. So it's interesting. I had, as a young kid, I functioned fine with non-white people. I didn't have any, I had no sort of racial, I wasn't aware that racial bias existed or that there were different social groups. I sort of, I understood that people looked different and stuff like that, but I didn't have any stereotypes yet. And then when I got to high school, it was interesting because we had different non-white groups that went to my high school, so I grew up in a very predominantly white place. And we had non-white individuals, and they all hung out together. And they didn't hang out with us, was what I was just going to say. Sort of got, that's nice, right? Classic white person statement. So the people that were non-white tended to group together, and the people that were white tended to group together. And that I started to notice these differences, and I started to notice that life is different for different groups. It is more okay for me to go to parts of the school where the non-white people hung out than it was for the non-white people to come to the parts of the school where the white people hung out. And I thought that was peculiar. So I started to learn things. I started to see things that struck me. So then by the time I'm in college, I did my senior thesis on inaccuracies in eyewitness judgments. So, I hypothesized or made the prediction that a person committed the crime, that you would, if you saw a lineup photos, you'd be more likely to say that it was a Hispanic-looking person than it would be the white person, because your brain, and I didn't know this stuff at the time, but I sort of had the sense that your brain or mind would kind of gravitate towards a stereotype about who was more likely to commit the crime. So I started to get interested in racial issues and how our minds made these cognitive errors about who committed a crime, for God's sakes. That's a serious thing. Why would you see these, these biases, race biases, such that you'd be more likely to think a person that was non-white committed a crime? And then that led me to start thinking, well, of course, it's because on television, all of the bad people, the people who committed the crimes, are non-white. So then, fast forward to now, where here's this, socially conscious person that tries really hard to be egalitarian, that works hard to eradicate her own biases and the ones that she sort of got through her culture and through her socialization. And so I find myself more interested in what's going on in the mind of the other person. So I was sitting on the train the other day. I live in Connecticut and I commute to New York City. And I was sitting on the train next to this guy, and I think he was African American. I'm not sure. I didn't hear him speak, so I didn't know if he had an accent or if he was from Africa or where. But he had dark skin, black skin. And I was sitting next to him on the train, and I found myself not worrying or feeling uncomfortable or anything, but I was trying to figure out what he was thinking. And I was trying to read the book that he had. I wanted to know about what was going on in his mind. And I noticed that our interaction was different than it would have been had he been a white guy. I noticed that he sort of, well, it's not always the case that you sort of make eye contact with the person that you're sitting next to, especially when the train is is full and busy. But there was something about our interaction, or lack thereof, it was just slightly off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I found myself really, really interested in what was going on in his mind. And so I think, to answer your question simply, I think the phase that I'm at right now in my interactions with non-white individuals is trying to understand where they're coming from, and trying to understand how they think the same way as me, how they think differently, how their life experience has shaped their perception in a way that's different from mine. And I do this more than I do for like opposite gender people, or I do this more than I do for people who, you know, have a different kind of job than I do. So the race difference is a special one for me. I'm very, very interested in sort of like what's going on in their mind, and you know, whether they wonder what's going on in mine, and trying to find all the ways in which I'm similar, and how their life experience is different from mine and similar to mine. So I find myself preoccupied thinking about those things more than I do when I'm interacting with other white people. But I think that any kind of like fear or weird stuff or lack of comfort, that's all gone. I don't have that the stuff that I started to have in high school, where I started to be like, oh, these groups of people are not the same as my groups of people, and this is weird, and should I be afraid of these people, and do they like me, and do I like them? That stuff's all gone. It's more of a like, just wanting to understand, and just wanting to find common ground, I think. So I think that's where I'm at now. I do find myself thinking more. There's still a difference. So when Dana Carney interacts with a person that's non-white, there's still a difference between that and Dana Carney interacting with a white person. And I would actually say that it's more specific to African Americans, because so growing up in California, there were a lot, certainly with Mexican Americans. I'm very familiar with Mexican American culture. I was with a Mexican American man for 8 years. We were together all through graduate school, and totally, to the extent I can understand the culture and the language. And so that group, I don't feel particularly, I don't feel any special way interacting with those people. I interact with Mexican Americans in particular just almost the same as I would white Americans or Caucasian Americans. So I think the group that I'm particularly fascinated by are African Americans, and I say that specifically because I don't mean like Haitian Americans or people from Haiti or people from Africa. I don't find myself with questions and thoughts and wanting to understand the life experience as much as I do African Americans. And so I guess what I'm saying is this, that the interaction isn't totally smooth, because I'm still just very interested in that one piece of like, what are you thinking about right now? Do you think I'm racially biased? Do you want to interact with me? Do you understand that I try hard not to be racially biased? Do you think about the same things I think about? What are you reading right now, and why are you reading that? And do you care that I sat down next to you? And that's these kinds of thoughts that I wouldn't normally have when I sat down next to a white person. So the interaction is different than it is with white people, but in a very unique kind of way that I'm not sure why I'm there, but this is where I'm at.
What do you do when you are around white people who practice racism and white supremacy?
What do I do when I'm around white people who practice racism, white supremacy?
Yes.
Well, I guess it depends. Luckily, I'm in a world where, well, for better or for worse, I should say, I'm in a world, academia, where racism is not explicit at all. So it's totally not okay to be racist. The kind of racism I'm more likely to encounter is actually the kind that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, which is, I like to think about it as overcorrection. It's like, excessive positivity towards non-white group members. And that's another kind of racism, right? Because it's certainly not egalitarianism. And I'm not talking about affirmative action and programs that have been put in place to try to equalize things so that we can get on some kind of equal playing field. I'm actually talking about people who, are excessively positive about a person that's non-white. And you're like, come on, this person's good and they're nice and everything, but they're not that great. Like, why are you talking about them like that? And so it's sort of like funny. It's this peculiar thing that you're not quite sure. Because on one hand, you're like, am I thinking that because I'm actually a racist? Or am I thinking that because it's actually absurd that this person thinks so highly of this person that's not that great? So I'm in a world where either the racism is very subtle or it's of the positive kind. And so I certainly excuse myself from anytime I do have, there's overt racism going on or there's a racist joke or whatever, I will excuse myself. First of all, I'll punish the person. By punish, I mean in a very psychological sense. Like, I'll make a comment. I will not ever, I don't care who I'm with or what sort of situation I'm in, I will absolutely spend social capital to censor or ostracize people that have said something that's disgusting or polluting. But then I very quickly try to reprogram myself. I try to have a bunch of really good thoughts about that social group member or that individual or whatever to try to de-bias whatever my brain just learned. I know this sounds crazy, but these are the kinds of things that we do. And so so those are some of the acts that I engage in when there's overt acts of prejudice or discrimination. I think that the more subtle ones are difficult because you spend a lot of time thinking through whether that was an act of discrimination or not, or what it meant, and could you be overanalyzing, and what did that mean? And then you realize that all that thinking that you're doing, again, is just making these associations in your mind, and you're like, oh God, I got to stop this. And then you think, if I stop thinking about it, then I won't figure it out and I won't understand it. I won't know how to act, but yet I'm socializing myself at that same time, right? I'm creating those links again. And so that's really tough. And then the positive kind is peculiar, and I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying to understand if I think it's bad or not. I'm not sure that I do. I definitely know that it's not, it's better than, well, I should ask you what you think, but I think that it's better than negative expressions of racial bias. I think it's still different. It's still not normal, right? It's still peculiar behavior. So I forget now the question, but I think it was, what do I do? How do I deal with bias and discrimination? I mostly excuse myself from it when it's around me because I can't. My brain, I can't handle the pollution. I don't want it in my brain. I need to excuse myself as much as I can because I already have my own pollution that I have to deal with. And then, trying to any little small way that I can help, I do. By helping people understand that what they said was biased in a way that was very subtle, that they didn't even recognize it. Like, for example, I would love to go through a transcript of this interview and all the things, racial in nature that don't even occur to me, like the things I said that just roll off my tongue that seem like totally fine and seem like not biased at all, that you'd be like, no, think about that. Think about what you just said. Think about what it implies, To the extent that I can do that for other people, I try to. And I think a lot. I think a lot about what behavior means and what I think of it and whether I think it's good or bad, especially with regard to the excessively positive behavior.
What do you mean when you say the positive kind of racism?
Well, what I mean, I don't mean positive racism. What I mean is overcorrection. So there's evidence to suggest that some people express racial bias by being excessively positive towards individuals that they have bias against. So some of your listeners might have had the experience of walking into a restaurant and, oops, I just spilled my iced tea. I'm walking into a restaurant and they are trying to get a table, and maybe your listener is not white, and they walk up to a hostess that is white. And the hostess says, "Oh, hello." So, excessive positivity, like, "Oh, what do you need? Oh, you need a table? Great, I'll get you one right now." Like, the host is doing everything that she can to sort of prove that she's not biased and that she really, really likes, non-white people, and that she's going to get them a table to sort of demonstrate how she's not biased and all of this. So I think it's better because, the onlookers, the people in the environment seeing this, are seeing they're seeing the surface behavior of positive behavior toward a non-white person, and in their brains they're making the association, oh, positive behavior, non-white person. So that's why it's better. The research suggests that the non-white person that's receiving that excessive positivity is probably smirking to themselves because it just sort of, it's clearly excessive, and while they may appreciate it, at least my girlfriend Smitria once said, it's not that it's unappreciated, it's just the motivations are clear. This person's trying to prove to me that they're not racially biased, and they're going out of their way to demonstrate that. So I think that's what I mean. But the research shows that it's still an expression of racial bias. It's just like an excessively positive. So it's almost like I know I'm racially biased, and so, to the extent that I am, I'm going to correct for that by behaving in a positive way to offset the negative behavior that I'm afraid that I might express. And what I end up doing is overcorrecting. I end up expressing too much positivity, which then, the non-white person with whom I'm interacting gets it, and they see this and they kind of smirk because they think it's funny or cute or whatever, or maybe bad. But I think that on balance, it's a little bit better than the negative expression of racial bias, but it's still the expression of racial bias. And so I'm trying to grapple with whether it, what I think about it, and whether I think it still perpetuates race bias the same way, whether it just changes the face of it. So once I gave a talk on these data, and I talked about the two faces of racial bias. That on one hand, you can express racial bias by, just acts of, aggression or discrimination or fear or whatever. But then there's this other face too, which is like this Joker-faced, like excessive, smiling, almost overly helpful side. And so it's not clear to me what I think about it yet, but I think about it a lot.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm going to request if I can ask one question, respect time restraints and everything, ask one question, but I'm going to defer because a lot of folks called and I want to give them an opportunity to ask you some questions, if they have good questions. If I get any nutty questions, calls are over and I'll ask my question to wrap things up. But are you okay taking a couple calls?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. Someone called in at 111. If you can make it quick, be brief with your question for Professor Dana R. Carney. 111. If you have a question, go right ahead.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I'll defer to you, Gus. I don't know if this question is so. You can go ahead.
Oh, you sure?
Well, yeah, because I know we don't have that much time, so.
I mean, it might be a great question. I don't know. I at least want to double check. You sure? You want to get it out?
Okay. I just thought of something when she was talking about, well, I'll just ask it quick. When I was growing up, if I got caught lying, my grandmother, she had like this saying. She was saying, like, if you lie, you would steal, and if you steal, you would kill. So when you were talking about how like white people, it's easier for them to lie, and I've seen that myself. It just seems, and then that what my grandmother said, if you lie, you will steal. If you steal, you will kill. It just seems like now that I'm older, it just seems like kind of pathology, kind of a psycho type of a way of being. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, totally. Gus, could I reply?
Please go right ahead.
Okay. So yeah, absolutely. My kind of theory about power and what it does is that it actually just makes it easier to do stuff, all kinds of stuff. Any kind of thing that would be hard usually to do, I think power makes it a little bit easier. Whether it's, God, that hill looks really steep. Geez, can I make it? Yeah, I can get, if you have power, if you feel powerful, you're like, yeah, let's go for it. I can get up that hill. But that same stuff makes it a little easier to lie. But I think that same stuff makes it a little easier to cheat. It makes it a little easier to steal. We actually have studies right now where we're testing this idea more broadly. So absolutely, I agree that, my sense is that power does more than just make it easier for you to lie. I think it just makes life a little bit less stressful. And that includes all kinds of things, good things and bad things. And so I think your grandmother was absolutely on to something.
I agree with the caller's assessment. I think the system of white supremacy dehumanizes non-white people, and once you have removed the humanity of a person or a group of people, there's really no limit to what you can do to them because they're not really people. So that's my view, so I agree completely. Mr. Nero, I believe, this is Mr. Nero. If you have a question for Professor Carney, Dana, excuse me, go right ahead.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Dana, for coming on the show this evening. I had a quick question. I'm just wondering, Dana, have you ever dated a African-American male?
No, I don't think I've ever had a black boyfriend. I liked this guy once who was African-American, but not ever had, I'm trying to think. No, I don't think I have. Why do you ask?
Well, when you mentioned about you were sitting next to the guy on the bus, and then you were wondering what he was thinking.
Yeah.
I just was curious if you had ever dated a black person before. That's all.
No, and it's funny that you should ask because there's actually research to suggest that when you have an intimate partner that's of a different social group, that's the context that actually can eradicate bias the best. So if you are, whatever social group you are, that if you have an intimate partner that's of a different social group, that you are less likely to be biased against that social group.
Wow, that is incredible. That's a whole nother program right there.
That's a whole nother. I know. I read some stuff on your website. I was like, so, but there is. But one of the ways of eradicating bias is to date people that are up.
That is total fine. That's like the first thing that you said where I just want to be like, okay, now that seems like some racism being practiced. I can't even believe that would be said. And not followed by just, thunderous laughter. I mean, if that was true, this would have been solved. This problem would have been solved a long time ago. We would not even be having this discussion. I mean, there's been a lot of.
Let me reframe so eradicate was totally a strong word. So evidence suggests that when people date people of different social groups, that their bias decreases towards members of that social group. That's a more accurate statement.
I don't see anything to support that at all. I mean, Thomas Jefferson did. Next, we'll have to do. We'll do another.
No, we don't even need to talk about that. No, we're not talking about that kind of dating. We're talking about real, love relationship, falling in love. Well, I guess Thomas Jefferson was supposedly in love. Okay, you know what? I will look for those studies, and if I can find them, I'll send them to you. And then we can have a whole other conversation if we want to, and we can think through together whether we buy this or not.
That is a plan. I would look forward and appreciate that very much, and I'm sure my listeners would as well.
Okay.
Last four digits, 2009. You have a question? Your mic is open. Go ahead.
Hello, Gus. Can I be heard?
Greetings. Yes, sir.
Okay, this is for your guest. It's a two-part question. I didn't get an answer from this from the whole show, but is white supremacy evil? And if so, the people that practice white supremacy, the white people, do they practice this to preserve their race?
Are we asking me this question?
Yes.
Okay. So is white supremacy evil? Well, the word evil has a religious sort of undertones to it. So do we think that white supremacy is problematic and deeply, do we think white supremacy is deeply problematic? Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone, rather, yes, I would agree with that 100%. It's deeply, deeply problematic. The second part of the question is, do we think that, sorry, can you just say again, do we think that people who practice white supremacy
practice it to preserve their race?
Oh, to preserve their race. Oh, right. And by preserve their race, you mean like their social standing or their power?
No, they're actually white skin.
Oh, you mean actually. That's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I'm qualified to answer it because it's not really a psychological question. I think it's more of a, I don't know, maybe a sociological one. I think that, I mean, I can give you my opinion. I mean, real white supremacists. So I know that the listeners and Gus, you guys think about racism in general as white supremacy. But let's just take a departure just slightly and say that there are actual real white supremacists that I would call white supremacists in my book that are actively, trying to preserve white skin, and yeah, of course, right? I mean, the one drop idea, right? Do you remember that? I'm sure you do. Like, if you had one drop of black blood, you were no longer white. And so I would say that white supremacy historically has been practiced to preserve the purity of the Aryan race and to not let it be polluted by any other ethnic group. Yeah, I mean, I think history. That's a historian question. Actually, that's not sociological. That's probably a question for a historian. But yeah, I think that's right. Totally.
So you believe that white supremacy is, instead of using evil, how about wicked?
Yeah.
Okay, wicked. And you believe that white people that practice white supremacy is, at the end of the day, the core reason is to keep...
Oh, I see. Yeah. So, okay, now you're asking a psychological question. I think that it's deeper motivation than that. I don't actually think that, so this, I don't know of any science on this. So now you're asking Dana, who has a science background, who thinks about these issues a lot, and that person is going to answer the question. I actually think that the reason why people are, like their group better than other groups and try to make sure that their group has more power and more resources than other groups, it's not about the color of their skin. I mean, while it's true that almost in every corner of the country, or rather of the world, that lighter skin is considered better and darker skin is considered less good, from Indians, meaning, in South Asia, to American people. I don't actually think that's the primary motivator. I mean, I think that the primary motivator is just to continue to have access to resources. I don't think that, when I say but our desire to have access to stuff and to survive and to have an easy life, I don't think that cares, that those motivations don't care what color my skin are. I think that if purple were the skin color to be, that would be fine. It's just that whatever the system says gives me resources is the skin color that you want, right? I mean, we see that all of the time. It's like people will change their personalities just slightly. They'll change how tan they are or what color their hair is to kind of accommodate the environment. Whatever that culture, whatever that environment says is the way to get stuff, the way to have power, then that's what people want to look like and act like. So I think when you ask it that way, I don't actually think the issue is about the color of the skin per se. I think it's probably more about the access to resources, to people, to to food, to money, to jobs.
Hello? Myself. We have one last caller and my question. So do you have time for 2 final questions?
Yep.
Okey-dokey. The caller who I think is showing as 111, different caller at 111. Your mic is open if you have a question for Dana. Do you have a question? Person called in at 111, or are you just listening? Think they're just listening. Okay. My question. The final study, judgments of prejudice when expression reveals and overcorrection conceals. And you talked a little bit about the overcorrection already and how some white people who are racist, they will be extremely friendly to a non-white person to hide their own racist, white supremacist thoughts. A part of this study involved having 2 participants, I believe one black and one white. They would have a dialogue about a movie, and this would just be it was purposely just to have this dialogue so that there's no quote unquote right answer. Just you share whatever your thoughts are about this film. And the films that were selected: The Matrix, Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, The Green Mile, As Good as It Gets. And I put a huge, I highlighted all of those when I was reading this study on Saturday. And I mean, that's particularly, that was the first thing that I asked you about when we spoke on the phone today, was those films. And you said that they were picked because you don't think about these films as being, about racism or about big issues. These are just, films that everybody enjoyed that do have a leading black actor. Is that an accurate summary of what you shared about the films that were selected?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so just a layer on there. In the experiment, I needed sometimes the interaction be a race-related issue. So I needed movies that I face something that was about race, a race-related movie, or issue. So the movie was actually chosen very specifically to be able to go either way. I could say, so talk about the movie. How'd you like it? Or do you think that anyone would be offended by the way race was depicted in the movie? So it was picked to go either way.
It was picked to go either way. Okay. I just want to be clear. Can you give us what you mean when you say either way? Like it was picked to go either way. That means.
Yep. So what I mean by that is that sometimes in the social interactions, they were just talking about a movie. They were just talking about whether they liked the movie and whether they thought anyone would be would find would have a problem watching the movie. And then in the other condition, it's an experimental condition. So in one condition, they're just talking about the movie, kind of more benign like things. And then in another condition, I actually brought out the fact that there was a black actor in the movie, and do they think that blacks or whites would be offended by the way race was depicted in the movie? Was the sort of question that I wanted to have a race-related discussion about. And so I needed, The Matrix was the ideal movie because Morpheus's character is he's this amazing character, and he just happens to be black. And so you can talk about The Matrix and not ever really think about the fact that Morpheus is black until you point it out, and then you can ask me, do I think that, anyone would be offended by the way race was depicted in the movie? And then I'm like, whoa, I have to think about that. So that's what I mean by could go either way. I can either classify Morpheus as a black actor and talk about the race themes in the movie, or I can just talk about, the movie The Matrix and talk about the actors that are of, all different races and ethnicities.
Very interesting.
Tell me why you think it's so interesting. I'm nervous. What are you saying? percolating in your brain back there. You got something going on. I'm about to get a heart question. I can come and.
And you know,
let me have it. Come on.
I thought, other than As Good as It Gets, and I have seen As Good as It Gets, Jack Nicholson, I just haven't seen it in quite some time. I truthfully don't even remember the non-white character who's in As Good as It Gets.
Cuba Gooding Jr. Isn't Cuba Gooding Jr. But yeah.
Wow. That would be a ring. Okay. I'll watch that. I might even watch it today. I might make time to watch it today. The other 4 films, I have seen all of them frequently, actually, and recently. In all of those 4 films, well, I guess I can back up and say those 4 films are picked consistently by a variety of different folks to break down racism, white supremacy. All 4 of those films: The Matrix, Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, The Green Mile. There's a counter-racist film review for The Green Mile.
Sorry, just to clarify, you can say like, oh, white racism doesn't exist. Look at these great movies, kind of thing.
No, that you can learn a lot about racism, white supremacy by watching The Green Mile, Pulp Fiction, The Matrix, Shawshank Redemption. That racism, white supremacy is such an integral part of the content of those films. Just, I would say, core to the plot, the development of all of those films, that if you watch the film and appreciate the film and have an understanding of what happened in the film, you'll get a very solid understanding of racism, white supremacy. Like, I have written a film review for Pulp Fiction. I know someone who wrote a classic counter-racist film review for The Matrix. I had a white person, Dr. Martin Kevorkian. He's a professor at the University of Texas, Austin. He wrote a book where The Matrix prominently figures in his discussion of how racism, white supremacy seeps into all aspects of the culture. If I would just give you one really subtle look at these films, you see a black male handcuffed in 4 of these 5 films. Morpheus is handcuffed in Matrix. Morgan Freeman in jail for the duration of the film, pretty much. Pulp Fiction, Ving Rhames is handcuffed and sodomized by a white enforcement official. Whoa. Green Mile, Michael Duncan Clark, handcuffed. That right there is extraordinary, that these films would get picked. They could go either way, where just something that subtle, where you see a black male handcuffed in all of these, well, I don't know, I have to see As Good as It Gets, but at least 4 of the 5, you see a black male handcuffed at some point in the film.
Yeah,
very
that's
interesting.
A good point. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think, I was at a loss. So this is actually, racism in and of itself. So I was, back in 2002, to come up with films. I needed films that everyone had seen, so they had to be popular. But they needed to have a prominent black character. So, each of the movies is about race, especially The Green Mile. The Green Mile was actually a mistake, because that movie was totally about race, and that one who talked about The Green Mile knew that it was a story about race. I think if things are a little more subtle with Shawshank, I think that Shawshank is more about friendship than it is about race. I think that, The Matrix is certainly more about other stuff than it is about race. So it's interesting. I mean, going back, I'm not sure if I would select the same movies. I think that it's an interesting exercise in racism in and of itself, that I had a hard time coming up with movies that my subjects, my college student participants, would have seen that happened to have a prominent black character in it that didn't have all this crap like handcuffed black dudes and, people in jail that happen to be black and all of this, right? So that's problematic right there, that I couldn't even develop a list of movies that, you wouldn't have a problem with. So it's interesting to think about that, I mean, even today, what movies would we come up with if I had to redo the study today and come up with a list of movies? I mean, there's just not that many movies. I mean, this just gets back to this idea of implicit racial bias and how we're socialized. I mean, these are the movies, these very same movies that I had to use to highlight race issues in the lab to kind of get people to talk about race themes. are some of the very same movies socializing us to have those racial biases in the first place.
I could not agree more. In fact, I wanted to highlight the fact all of these films were nominated for multiple Academy Awards, not just one, racks of Academy Awards, all of these films. And we just did a show in the past week where we talked about a lot of the Academy Awards. Pulp Fiction's Quentin Tarantino, that came up again in talking about Inglourious Basterds, which was nominated for a rack of Academy Awards as well. That I said repeatedly, white people enjoy racist films.
That's interesting.
If you look at the Academy, if you look at the Academy Award winners consistently, it'll be exactly what you got here: Pulp Fiction, Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, The Matrix, Glory. It'll be generally Gone with the Wind. It will be films that display racism, and oftentimes in a very explicit manner. Forrest Gump as well. And just the roots of Hollywood is minstrelsy. Minstrel shows, Al Jolson, that's the foundation of Hollywood. If you go back at Birth of a Nation, I could be incorrect, but I think I would add this to my collection of evidence that white people, this is a system of white supremacy. That's part of the programming.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I never really thought about that, but it's true that we people, humans, the architecture of the human mind is such that we gravitate towards things that make sense to us, or that our world of view. So I could imagine, all people being more comfortable watching movies that kind of, at least a little bit, reflect back to them what they believe or what they think is the case. And so white people might prefer watch movies with racial undertones more than, with, let's say, pro-black undertones. That's a really interesting question, and the research evidence would suggest that even if the white participants in the study really believed that they were egalitarian and wanted to be, that it's not going to be as comfortable for them to watch something that distorts their worldview, right? Because it's messing with their expectations. It's messing with the way that they see the world. It's kind of like, it's not a fairy tale exactly. It's just like a different way of seeing the world, and that's comfortable for people. People want to know. So really, there's yet another really interesting research question, and how messed up with that, right? It sounds like you were told that that's the case. My guess would be that you bring some evidence to support that, and that's deeply problematic. Because you have a system again where you have people gravitating towards, films with racist themes because it's comfortable for people to watch, because that's what they experience in their everyday life, and that white people don't see those subtleties, right? Like, I won't even notice the same subtleties that a non-white person would notice, but the subtleties are there and they're comfortable because that's what I see in my everyday life, and so then I gravitate towards those movies, and then I laud them, or I sort of want them to get awards, and then in Hollywood consists of people, and those people vote for which ones get awards, and that would be an interesting analysis too, to do look at how racially biased, or what the racial, sort of stereotypic themes are in the movies and likelihood of winning an award. That's actually a really interesting question too.
I think you would find a lot of evidence that would support my theory. I'm just very confident about this. You can go look at the Academy Award winners for any year, and it's just going to be a lot of racist films. So a lot of the films that win and are nominated, you'll see a lot of racist content, and it's generally very explicit. Even The Godfather, they have several very explicit scenes where they reference black people as niggers and monkeys in all of them, not just one, and it's several scenes. It's not just one or two moments in The Godfather. That's a consistent aspect of the film, and I just see that as a big trend. And I think it ties nicely with your work in that seeing these images of racism, particularly that get celebrated and lauded as some of the best cinematography, that really compounds and reinforces. Oh yes, we should be practicing racism. We should be practicing racism.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's so interesting because you say so many things that are cool. So one thing that you said that was cool too is that not only is my brain making the association between black guy in jail with handcuffs on, but then when it gets all these awards, my brain codes that link. So I just made the link, black and handcuffs, black and dangerous. But then when this film wins these awards, I code that link as positive and noteworthy. And it's almost like, I wonder what happens to that link. I wonder if it gets magnified times 10 or whatever. You know, each Academy Award like magnifies the link to the Green Mile between, you know, a black guy and, in handcuffs in jail or whatever. And so that's actually a really interesting and problematic question too. I had never thought about that sort of way in which, you know, an accolade or an award like the Academy Award can actually increase the prominence of that link in your mind. And so that's yet another interesting thing you said.
I want that research that.
I didn't say sexual intercourse. I said relation. You know what? Let me find the science, and then I'll send it to you, and you can decide what you think.
Okay. I would love to have you back to have a discussion around that whole issue, because I think that's very important. And if we can continue the candid dialogue, I think that would be great.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Thank you a ton, did overtime and everything, for hanging out. I think the information was very constructive. And, if you can get me that info, I would love it. I would definitely research it and highlight. And, we could chat it up again.
Good. That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I'm sorry I take too long to answer questions. I have too many things to say, and I'm not very concise. I apologize.
No worries. It was very informative, very thought-provoking, and I'm appreciative of your time. Get an expert on the program.
Good. Thank you for having me.
For sure. Have a great evening. Finish moving in, and I will be in touch soon.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Justice. Bye.
Okay.
Again, Colombia Business School's Dana R. Carney. I think very constructive information. I could be incorrect. Make sure I concede that freely. She might not have been informative, but I think very constructive information. I noted that today. These are films that I've seen a lot, like The Matrix. I know I've seen that over 20 times. Pulp Fiction, I've seen that more than 20 times. Green Mile, I think I've seen that about 15 times. Shawshank Redemption, I think I've seen that about 15 times. I noted that on the fly today going into to do this program that, oh yeah, you've got a black male in handcuffs in every one of those films. Very interesting. And I didn't have a problem with her picking those films. I think it speaks more to the just incredible dominance of the system of white supremacy that, you know, you're doing this work ostensibly working against racism, ostensibly, and these are the films that you end up picking to have a conversation about race. I mean, a black male being bound, handcuffed, and sodomized by a white enforcement official. These are the films that we got to pick from, right? Like, disgusting. Justice, did you have any thoughts on what Dana Carney shared today? If you thought it was constructive, any thoughts?
When she was talking about when white people would say, I don't like you, to non-white people, and some other things that white people would say, I think that was interesting.
When she said, I don't like you?
Yeah, it's like that is what white people would say, like non-white people. Like, get away from me, I don't want to touch you.
Oh, right. Yeah, I thought the questions when you asked her how to stop people from being deceptive, and she said to some of the suggestions that she had, like to make them work in the conversation, or if you can kind of put some pressure on them, that can mess up somebody who's trying to lie to you. I thought that was very constructive.
And I think what would have been better was when I don't think she should be, like, laughing. Because, I mean, on the Cows Radio show, we're serious about replacing white supremacy with justice.
That's a good point. You've pointed that out before. I will admit I need to be more disciplined and not snicker as much, not laugh as much on the program. I laughed yesterday with Timothy a few times. Yeah, actually, Taylor Pye, she caught some of that laughter, and she was thinking, could that be overcorrecting? That was what Dana Carney, that was what she was talking about, where someone who is racist, they will try to be very, very nice and smile a lot and do other things to hide their racism. She was saying that maybe her laughter could have been overcorrecting. I thought that was interesting. You should bring that up maybe next time. Let her know that you would like her to be more serious on the program.
Yeah.
Or anyone else, anybody else. If we have any other guests that you think if they're laughing or not being serious, you should point that out. Did you have anything else you wanted to share about today's show or yesterday's show or anything else?
Nope. Show my email address. justice.asap@yahoo.com. Again, justice.asap@yahoo.com.
Outstanding. We will be back on Thursday. If we do the program on Thursday, April will set the new record for a total number of programs in 1 month. 17 did a lot of work this month. I'm ambivalent about that because February, that was the month that I did the most programs. I did 16 programs in February of this year. And I'm not into the whole black thing, but I was like, hey, Black History Month, I did the most programs. But if we get the broadcast Thursday, that will go by the wayside. Thursday, I believe it'll be 2, Mr. and Mrs. Ragsdale. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, Ragsdale. If you've been listening, Irritated Genie and Sister Nefertari, they both raved about this couple. They're married, actually. They're non-white, black male and a black female. They did a film series on slavery. It's called My Slave System, My Family. And it just gives a lot of accurate information, detailed information about formal slavery in this area of the world and how it relates to what's happening now. They have a museum in Philadelphia, and they also have documentaries covering this material. So they'll be here on Thursday, April 29th at same time as today, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific. I have not entered into the program yet just because busy. Tim Wise was here yesterday, just busy. But I will get it done today. But yes, that is Thursday, next broadcast, Thursday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I believe it'll be 2, Mr. and Mrs. Ragsdale. Should be very constructive. I'm looking forward to it. Let's see, other things. Boondocks Season 3 this weekend. I'm excited. May 2nd, Boondocks Season 3. I'm a little bit happier on the plantation when I have the Boondocks to watch. And they talk about racism, best of all worlds. I can get some laughs in and see information about racism, white supremacy. Let's see. Cree, counter-racist evolving engineer. She will have a program on Friday, April 30th at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Pacific. Lenny Miller, black NASCAR racer, should have lots of constructive information, like black people in NASCAR. Wow. Should be very interesting. Again, Friday, this week, Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Pacific.
Sorry for interrupting, Gus. I just started watching a couple episodes of the Boondocks Season 1.
Wow. Which episode did you see?
the first one, and I think the one with Dr. Martin Luther King.
Oh, wow. What did you think about that one, the one with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Strange, because after when he woke up for 30 years, a non-white male started throwing some bricks at, or tried to throw some bricks at him.
Yep, I remember that. I believe that was Uncle Ruckus who threw a brick at him. I could be incorrect, but I remember that. He called them names, too. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and he worships white people.
Yep, yeah, he does. He does. Wow. Yeah, that was a really funny episode. Very funny episode. Wow. I'm trying to think what else happened on that one. It seemed like people didn't want to hear Martin Luther King talking about racism. It seemed like people didn't want to hear that. Is that what you saw?
Yeah, and because some people were like, when he came back, he was like, well, wow, I can't believe when I came back after 30 years, all of a sudden it's like it started changing. People have been acting really weird. And what's on the TV?
Yeah. Television has a big impact. We've heard about that a lot. Television has a big impact. I think if Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if he was alive, or Malcolm X, or a lot of the other people, Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, I think if they were alive now and they could see television, I think they would be stunned at the stuff that's on TV. Like, it's a lot of Pulp Fiction, you know? I mean, you got black males being handcuffed and sodomized by white enforcement officials. That's top quality cinema, you know? Yeah, that's a good one. You said you saw the first one too. Is that the one where they went to the party? It was like outside. They all went to the white person's house for a party.
You mean the Dr. Martin Luther King one?
Or the other one? Did you see 2 episodes?
Yeah, I think I saw 2 or 3. I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was the first one when the white person said, "Do you like guns?"
Yeah.
It was when. Yeah, it was when the party. It was at the party.
I see. Yeah, that white person, he had a lot of guns, didn't he?
Yes, a lot.
Yep. White people. That's pretty close to reality. If you check the newspaper, read the newspaper. It was reported in the newspapers when President Obama was elected in November of 2008. Record numbers of gun sales, ammunition sales, and this was just white people. This was not Negroes running to the gun store left and right to stock up. This was white people going out to buy guns and stock up. And now you see the so-called Tea Party activity out in the streets with armed white people. That's white people and their guns, man. What else is in that episode? I'm trying to think. The garden party. Do you remember when the white people, they were laughing at Huey, like he was trying to talk to them about racism, and they just started laughing at him?
Yeah, it's like they were just like ignoring him. Like they started laughing and clapping. They were saying, "Oh, he's so cute," and yeah.
Yeah, didn't take him too seriously. Wow. Yeah, I love the Boondocks. That's like my favorite television show. I like the Boondocks more than Flash Forward. We talk about that a lot. Yeah, I can't wait for the new season. They're supposed to have a brand new episode this weekend, this Sunday. Yeah, I'm looking forward. They have previews. I was gonna play one, but I lost my switchboard. But they have previews where they have one where they're picking on Tiger Woods. I thought that was, I don't like picking on non-white people, but it was kind of funny. And they talked about the white chicks in this clip. And they have another one where they're talking about President Obama. And I was real curious to see how they were going to deal with President Obama in the new season. So it looked pretty funny, the clips that I saw. Hopefully I'll get to play one before the new season starts. Here, I get to do it on Thursday when we have the show. I think there are several shows. There are several shows this week. We have a show Thursday. There's a show on, I believe it's Sunday, May 4th. Well, not Sunday, May 4th. Whatever day May 4th is. That's next week, I guess, next Monday. Andrew Manis will be on the program. That should be a lot of fun. He's a white person. Change seeker. There's a white female. She'll be on the show on Saturday. She has a blog. I believe she is married to a non-white person, or at least had a child with a non-white person, and she says she's against racism. She saw the show, and she saw that Tim Wise and Peggy McIntosh and some other folks had been here, and she was, excited to come chat with us. I don't know if she read everything on the show page, but she said she was excited to come talk, so that should be interesting. That's Saturday. Yeah, she should have a busy month. Yeah, when you see some more Boondocks episodes, I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts. If you get to see some more episodes, or if you get to see the new episode that's coming on this week. I like the Boondocks a lot, so we can talk about that on the show for sure.
Okay.
Groovy. If I had my switchboard, I would put folks on because I'd be curious to see what people thought of Dana Carney, but I don't have my switchboard. My apologies, gang. I'll try and see if we can do it on Thursday so you all can share. Just remember, if you have anything you'd like to share about Dana Carney, take a note and save it for the Thursday show. I'll see if we can make time to discuss on Thursday. Again, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. The Ragsdales, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, My Slave System, My Family. Should be a great program. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for today. Context of white supremacy, justice. Gus T Renegade. Hopefully the program was constructive. If not, please don't waste your time here. Find something constructive to do. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. And definitely I want to say thank you to Khadijah and Tater Pie promoting the program. I have a fan page now, too. If you go to Facebook and you do a search for Gus T Renegade, you will see the group page and you'll see the fan page. So you can go join the fan page. Yeah, you can leave notes there, what have you. I check it. It's nice. But yeah, thank you to Khadijah and Tater Pie for promoting the program and your support. I appreciate it. Thank you. I love seeing the cows pop up on Facebook. It's great. We will be back on Thursday. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Cows signing out.